Alright, so I'm going to talk about leaks. And usually when you hear that, you think of music being leaked. But it actually goes into film, entertainment, like festivals and stuff. So yeah, we're going to talk. So what is when something gets leaked? It is when something is unreleased, or in the filming case, when something is held on a private streaming service, paid for, and it's released out to the public for free. A big case in music was back in 2011 with Madonna. She had a song finished with MIA and Nicki Minaj featuring on it, and it got leaked. This obviously causes like many issues, and it caused a problem with Madonna and her fans because she was, I'm not gonna say mad. There's quotes where they're saying a real fan wouldn't do this. You're not a fan if you're gonna leak my music. Like, great, you want to hear my music, but why are you gonna release it? Like, that's not on you. The person that leaked it did get arrested, and I'm not under Madonna, but like Madonna organized it to find them out and get them arrested. As far as film, leaked isn't really talked about. It's really overlooked, but it actually is a pretty big thing. I would honestly almost say bigger than music, because they have these illegal websites with just free movies, and if you think about it, those are all leaked. Whether they're taken from Netflix, Hulu, whatever, it's leaked because it's supposed to be paid for and is put out into the public for free. Netflix is actually having an issue. Well, not an issue, but it's like in the back of their minds that they're going to have problems with their stuff getting leaked because people are paying for their service, but somebody can take a video off of there and put it out into the public and either make people pay to get it from them or just give it out for free, which is what a lot of people do in film and music. So yeah, it is a problem in film as well as music. A problem with fraud, fraud in general, not necessarily leaks, was the Fyre Festival, which is something that everybody knows, and if you don't, it was a festival that was promoted to be something great, and it did not have the funds or organization or proper team behind it. Pretty much almost everything that they promoted was not there. People spent the money to fly out there and get tickets to an island, and when they got there, there was no housing and no proper food and nothing that was promised. So clearly the event organizer got into a lot of trouble, ended up getting arrested as well because people paid for the service and they didn't get it. That's really fraud.
So Christina just introduced you guys a bit to what leaks are when it comes to music and when it comes to movies, and also a little bit about the Fyre Festival situation. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the ramifications of all those different types of fraudulent situations and how you can prevent them and what to do if they occur. So when it comes to leaks, this is more than a public relations crisis. It's actually an accounting crisis too. Because leaks mean that the financials of a certain release can't be as accurately recorded, which means economic standing for the artist or the company can't be as well assessed. Leaks can happen at many different points in the music making process. During production, during mixing and mastering, during distribution, or during press and journalism, because there are so many different exchanges and transfers when it comes to putting out a record. So many people thought that with the government taking down Napster, which if you guys aren't familiar with Napster, it was a file sharing service that was popular in the early 2000s. Where you could essentially download MP3s for free. People thought that when they took down Napster that leaks would become a lot less common, but with the rise of streaming and the rise of really just technology in general, we're still seeing it be like an actual problem for artists. There was an entire article released by the New Yorker which essentially delved into the lives of the people that were responsible for the file sharing crisis, and you guys can go read that on your own time, but essentially what you can take from it is that there is a lot of money to be made when it comes to bootlegging and when it comes to leaking, and the earlier that a leaker can get access to a record and put it out, the more money they can make off of it. So it's an entire underground black market, illegal market running right alongside the market to release music. A lot of artists have spoken up about the measures that they take to prevent leaks. that perhaps up-and-coming artists can apply to their own lives. So the first of these is actually an internal control as well, but it's just general confidentiality agreements. You should have agreements that are signed pre-recording and agreements that are signed post-recording that essentially holds everybody that's a part of the process liable if there is a leak. Confidentiality agreements make it so that it's legally binding, which means that people can be prosecuted if there is a leak. So obviously once those consequences are set in place, people are less likely to take the process lightly. Another recommendation by artists is to not use email for anything. If you have a track and you're trying to get different opinions on it or get a collaborator's input on it, don't use email whenever you can avoid it, because emails can easily be hacked. When you do have to use the internet to get a collaborator's or professional's opinion on your work, try to use services that allow you to just stream the track as opposed to only download the track. So this is like, for example, SoundCloud. On SoundCloud, you can just stream a track, you don't have to download it. Whenever you can, limit the amount of exchanges, which is essentially limiting the amount of hands that your track falls into. So for example, if you want people to collaborate on your track, have them come into the studio or come to wherever you're recording, as opposed to sending it to them, having them lay down their vocals and send it back. Or like with producers and mixers, don't let them take your track home to work on it from home. Let them only do it in the studio while you're present, or like security is present, that type of stuff. Another route that a lot of artists have been taking are to move independently. So as opposed to working in major recording studios where there could be lots of moles or people trying to profit off of illegally releasing your work, you could just record independently, record privately. And we've seen this with certain artists taking major precautions, such as like only recording in hotels and changing the hotels every single time, only having like 2 to 3 engineers working on the track, always having the collaborators come in to work on the track, using external hard drives and then completely wiping the hard drives afterwards, etc., as a means to make sure that things aren't released illegally before an artist releases it themselves. For the Madonna situation, she said herself that she believes her album didn't perform as well because it was leaked so far in advance in its entirety. So any precautions that you can take from this list and apply will help so that the same thing doesn't happen to you. So when it comes to film, this is also very tricky, especially with streaming becoming so popular and people finding ways to rip films off of sites and post them up for free. One of the main things that you can do if you're working in a film studio is to have security guards auditing at all times. So that's essentially security being around the employees while they're doing their work to make sure that they're not breaking any rules. Another thing that film studios are getting really savvy with is management of their film scripts. They seem to have a lot of tricks up their sleeve that are helping to prevent the release of film scripts, which can be just as detrimental as a release of the finished product. When it comes to film scripts, actors are almost always not allowed to take them home. Sometimes major studios will have their scripts available on iPads that you only have access to when you're on set. Or if you are allowed to take them off set, the scripts will auto-delete after a certain amount of time. So basically, you've had enough time to learn your lines and then the script automatically deletes so that it can't be put elsewhere, tampered with, or anything like that. I believe during Star Wars The Force Awakens, when they printed their scripts, they printed them on red paper, which essentially means that if anyone were to take the script and try to photocopy it, it would be completely illegible in the copy. And then another thing that film studios have been doing is changing certain words in the script different from what they're going to be in the film. For each copy of a script, they'll change certain words in the dialogue from what the actual words were, so that if someone were to photocopy it or distribute it, it's much easier to trace where that leak came from because of the specific different wording. Another thing film studios are doing today is that they're bringing things to court and opening lawsuits, essentially to make it so that bootleg sites are not allowed to have good SEO, so that the bootleg of a movie won't pop up when you search for the movie. Different parties are trying to take down the websites, but this wouldn't necessarily be to take down the website, it would just make it so that it wouldn't pop up on Google. The last main thing they do is probably the most obvious, which is that you can't record when you're in a movie theater. Just a little anecdote, I know that at my previous college we got to go to press releases of movies because of this film club that I was in. So during the press releases, not only were we not allowed to have our phones during the movie, we weren't allowed to have our phones before the movie, and if we saw on our phones even before the movie had started, we'd be kicked out of the theater. So there were very strict rules prohibiting people from being on their phones during film screenings. And it should also be noted that if you do have your phone out during a movie and get caught at different theaters, they can call the authorities and they can arrest you for it. The last example of fraud we were talking about was the Fyre Festival situation. So Billy McFarland, the orchestrator of Fyre Festival, was arrested on the charge of wire fraud. Wire fraud is essentially tampering with a financial transfer so that it ends up in a different account than the account that it was supposed to be sent to. So the ramifications of wire fraud is that they can deeply damage a company's reputation, and also the amount of time that it takes to fix wire fraudulent activity and alert the authorities is also a major problem. However, there are many ways that you personally or your company can work to avoid wire fraud. Once again, we're going to bring up the topic of email. It's not a reliable means of transferring money. So discussing financial transfers through email is not a safe way to be conducting business. But it does happen very commonly. So if you are in a situation where you're speaking with a client, speaking with another business, whomever, over email about transferring money, do your best to call them and confirm on the phone so you can hear their voice and make sure that this isn't just someone who's hacked into their email who's trying to get money out of you or your company. There are also recommended internal controls that you could have in your company. The first one is the standardization of financial documentation. This essentially means that if a problem were to come up, it's a lot easier to pinpoint it and identify where it came from so that you can more quickly remedy it. So this is more like damage control. Then a more preventative internal control would be periodic reconciliation. So this is essentially a means to monitor your bank balances and bank accounts daily to ensure that there aren't any weird transactions or suspicious transactions. So when it comes to dealing with wire fraud, it's literally just a matter of the clock, how quickly you can remedy the situation. Another aspect of that is knowing when to alert authorities, which is essentially if you have any inkling of a thought that wire fraud might be occurring within your company, you should alert the authorities then, because that gives you a lot more time than if you were trying to trace where it was coming from yourself and then by the time you do that it's too late. Another control you can have is to have just basically policies in place that are reviewed semi-annually so that your employees are all familiar with them. You could even maybe like test them on the policies having to do with how your company is going to deal with wire fraud specifically. Another preventative action you can put in place is having a secondary authentication when it comes to wire transfers. So that's like when you have two-factor identification. So you try and log in on something, then it sends a little message to your phone, and then you type in that code. That's two different steps that you have to go through to get to where you want to be. It's the same thing with a second authentication of wire transfers. So instead of just having the money go from party 1 to party 2, it stays within your company, goes from party 1 to party 2, and then once it's authenticated, sent out to party 3. And then the last thing you can do, probably when your company starts growing, and maybe even implement it regularly, is to have an outside party come in to assess the security of your IT. So they'll essentially come in and look at your entire system, look at your operations, and see in what areas you may be lacking that people could prey upon. So that essentially is the ramifications and preventative measures you can take when it comes to different types of fraud that you might face being in the entertainment industry.